What if the deadliest thing about the Stone Age wasn't the lions? Wasn't the winters? Wasn't the starvation? What if it was other people? You've probably heard the Stone Age described as brutal in a vague, cinematic way. Cold nights, hungry days, dangerous animals. That's the version you see in documentaries. The real version is worse, and it's hiding in the bones. Let's start with a number that should stop you. In many prehistoric populations studied by anthropologists, somewhere between 40 and 50% of children died before reaching adulthood. Not from war, not from murder, just from the ordinary difficulty of being alive. Sit with that for a second. If you had 5 children, statistically, you'd expect to bury 2 of them. Researchers like Hillard Kaplan, who studied demographic patterns across multiple hunter-gatherer societies, found this wasn't a rare tragedy. It was the baseline. It was expected. Every parent in that world understood, on some level, that loving a child meant accepting the real chance of losing them. Why? Infection, parasites, childbirth complications with no modern medicine to intervene, a small cut that turned septic, a fever that spiked in the night with nothing to bring it down. Now here's where it gets darker. Because disease and hunger weren't even the most surprising killers. Humans were. For decades, a comforting myth circulated in anthropology. The idea that prehistoric humans were basically peaceful. That organized violence, real warfare, was a much later invention. Something that came with farming, property, and cities. Small hunter-gatherer bands, the story went, had no reason to kill each other. Too much land, too few people, nothing worth fighting over. Then the evidence started contradicting the myth. In 2016, a team led by paleoanthropologist Marta Mirazón Lahr excavated a site called Nataruk, near Lake Turkana in Kenya. What they found was not subtle. Skeletons, roughly 10,000 years old, showing catastrophic injuries. Skulls fractured by blunt weapons. Arrow points still embedded in bone. Hands bound before death. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't one unlucky person attacked by a predator. This was a group of people, including women and children, killed together in what looks disturbingly like an organized raid. 10,000 years old, before farming, before cities, before anything you'd call civilization. So why would hunter-gatherers, supposedly with nothing to fight over, end up slaughtering each other? Some researchers argue it's precisely because there was something to fight over. Not gold, not land deeds, resources that could mean survival or starvation. A good fishing spot during a drought. A territory with reliable water. Revenge for an earlier raid. Spiraling into cycles of retaliation that could span generations. And Nataruk isn't alone. Thousands of years later, and thousands of kilometers away, in what is now southern Germany, archaeologists uncovered a site called the Talheim Death Pit, roughly 7,000 years old. A mass grave containing dozens of bodies. Men, women, children, thrown in together, most killed by blows to the skull. Whoever did this wasn't sloppy about it either. The pattern of injuries suggests systematic execution. Line people up. Strike. Move to the next. This wasn't chaotic panic. This was deliberate. Let's reconstruct what a moment like this might have actually felt like. You live in a small band. Maybe 20. Maybe 30 people. Everyone knows everyone. Children run between shelters. Someone is always cooking. Always repairing a tool. Always watching the horizon out of habit rather than fear. Because most days, nothing comes. Then one day, something does. There's no warning system, no walls, no army, just distance and hope, and whatever weapons happen to be within reach. If a hostile group decides your band's territory is worth taking, worth eliminating the competition entirely, there's often very little standing between your entire community and a scene that looks exactly like Nataruk or Talheim. Now here's the counterintuitive twist. You might assume this makes the Stone Age a lawless nightmare. Every band constantly at war with every other band. Violence as a permanent background hum. That's not quite accurate either. Most days weren't violent at all. Most bands went years, sometimes generations, without experiencing anything like Nataruk. The danger wasn't constant. It was occasional, unpredictable, and when it arrived total. No police to call, no treaty to negotiate, no safe zone to retreat to, just whatever your own small group could muster in that exact moment. Some anthropologists, including researchers building on the work of psychologist Steven Pinker, have argued that this unpredictability, this all-or-nothing quality, might actually explain something strange about modern human psychology. Small-scale societies, precisely because they lacked centralized authority to prevent or punish violence, often experienced higher rates of violent death. Proportionally, than even the bloodiest wars of the 20th century. Not because individual people were crueler, because there was nothing standing between a disagreement and its most extreme possible outcome. Let that sink in. Living in a small band with no police, no courts, no government, meant that interpersonal conflict had fewer off-ramps. A feud couldn't be settled by a lawsuit. It escalated, or it didn't. There was no in-between institution to catch it. So if life could end this abruptly, this violently, why did any of this even survive? Why are you here? Descended from people who lived through this? Partly because humans didn't just fight. They also built extraordinary systems of cooperation, alliance, and trade, specifically to reduce this exact risk. Marriage between distant bands wasn't just romance. It was a survival strategy, creating obligations and relationships that made raiding a potential in-laws group a lot less appealing. Shared rituals, shared stories, shared ancestors, real or invented, gave separate bands a reason to see each other as extended family rather than rivals. In other words, the same terrifying vulnerability to violence may have driven humans to become obsessively, compulsively social, not because connection felt nice, because isolation could get you killed. Now think about what this means for you. Sitting comfortably wherever you are right now, you live inside an enormous, largely invisible cage of protection built from exactly the systems your ancestors didn't have. Police, courts, borders, governments with monopolies on organized violence, whatever their flaws, mean that most disputes in your life get resolved through paperwork instead of arrow points. A disagreement with a neighbor doesn't end in a death pit. An argument over resources gets litigated, not massacred. It's easy to complain about bureaucracy, about slow legal systems, about frustrating institutions. But every one of those frustrating, slow-moving structures is standing in a gap that, for most of human history, simply didn't exist. A gap where a bad day, a resource shortage, an old grudge, could turn into Nataruk, into Talheim. There's another terrifying truth buried in all this. And it's not about violence at all. It's about how differently your body was expected to fail. Consider childbirth. Today, in places with access to modern medicine, maternal death during childbirth is rare. Tragic, but rare. In prehistoric populations, researchers estimate maternal mortality could have been dramatically higher, sometimes estimated in the range of 1 to 2% per birth, compounding across a woman's reproductive life. If a woman gave birth 6 or 7 times, the cumulative risk of dying in childbirth at some point could climb into double digits. Now imagine knowing that, not abstractly, the way you might know a statistic today, but concretely, because you watched it happen to your mother's sister, your neighbor, someone in your band, more than once. That kind of fear doesn't just disappear. Some researchers argue it shaped entire categories of ritual and belief. Protective charms, taboos around pregnancy, elaborate customs meant to control an uncontrollable risk. When you can't fix a danger with medicine, you try to fix it with meaning instead. Here's the mirror moment. You live in a world where a headache means aspirin, where a broken bone means a cast and painkillers, where childbirth happens in a hospital with monitors and trained professionals standing by. None of that existed. Not the aspirin, not the cast, not the hospital. Every single one of your ancestors who survived to have children did so without any of it. They survived the 40 to 50% childhood mortality. They survived potential violent raids with no warning system. They survived childbirth with real, substantial odds of death, over and over, generation after generation, until eventually, one specific unbroken chain of survivors produced you. You are not just descended from clever humans, or strong humans, or lucky humans. You're descended from an unbroken chain of people who beat odds that, laid out honestly, are genuinely terrifying to look at directly. So what is the hidden terrifying truth about the Stone Age? It isn't really the cold, or the hunger, or even the lions circling just beyond the firelight. It's that survival itself was never guaranteed, never protected by any system larger than the people standing next to you, and that the peace, safety, and predictability you take for granted today are shockingly recent, shockingly fragile inventions. So the next time something as small as a stubbed toe or a stomach bug ruins your day, remember what that same event might have meant only a few hundred generations ago. Remember the death pits, the arrow points still lodged in bone, the mothers who didn't survive the birth of their 5th child. And maybe, just maybe, that ordinary inconvenience will start to feel a little more like the quiet miracle it actually is. Because the terrifying truth was never that the Stone Age was dangerous. It's that you're only here, reading this sentence, because someone, again and again, somehow wasn't killed by it.